Profile of this blade. Wow, you see those sparks hit me in the face? That is a good idea to wear safety glasses, because sometimes that'll get you in the eye and then that's a bad day. Here I'm working at welding heat. You can see the flux steaming on the steel, and that is just to initially close up any surface voids in that twist billet. So I'm forging it real hot. I'm just trying to close the surface. Flattening, screwing it up, because what I want to do is forge the handle first and not have to grind a whole lot. So I'm throwing it in the post vise here, good and tight. I'm beginning to upset the end into that little flare at the end of the handle. You can see it sliding down in the vise. When you upset stuff like this, usually you have to reheat it a few times and re-grip it, because that just happens. Join it up a little bit here. I want to start creating that little hook at the end. And I've speeded most of the hammering up to 3 times speed. Occasionally I'll leave a portion at this regular speed so you can kind of see what's going on better. Here I am just getting more width there at the butt of the handle. You want to get a good hot heat for that so you can get the most amount of work done with your hammer before it slides down in the vise. This is a technique that you use in artist blacksmithing a lot, just to create nice finials on bars and stuff, like on andirons or handrails. Checking it against a pattern I have over there. That's the original aluminum pattern that I made for my Forged in Fire Khopesh. Making sure the handle's roughly the right shape. Now I'm using a guillotine fuller to knock the starting place for the little guard in. Creates a double-shouldered indent. And then I can kind of hammer up to that with the narrow part of the handle. And I actually want to knock that in seemingly a little bit short to the pattern, because as I draw the handle thinner out behind it, it'll stretch the handle out. Hopefully I end up, at a place where that guard and the butt are in the right relation according to the pattern. It's getting there. Just got to use the hand hammer to kind of smooth out the power hammer work. Pretty close, straightening it up. Good for now, I think. Now we're going to start on the tip end. I've cooled the handle end off and I can hang on to it now. Now I'm hanging it over the edge of the anvil and striking it with a half-face blow to begin to create the hook at the tip of the Khopesh. It's pushing part of the steel down past the other face of the anvil to create that step. They true up the sides because they mushroom from that sort of thing. And here we're wailing away, starting to forge a point into the tip. Part of that action is upsetting it back toward the blade to create a bit more of a bulge while maintaining that hook shape over the edge of the anvil there. You can see it beginning to take shape there though. And the heat of the metal actually looks a little bit hotter on the camera than it does to the eye in the shop. I forge it pretty hot so that the hammer blows actually do something, but not quite at the welding heat for the most part that it appears to be here. More like at a high orange. I mean, I'll forge profile or even bevels at a welding heat occasionally if I think that there's some issue with one of the welds being delicate, but even so, I'll follow it with forging at lower temperatures and then normalization, because you don't want that grain pattern from forged welding heats in your finished blade. I mean, that grain size really, it makes it weak. So I've mostly created the shape of the tip, and I'm just flattening it out a little bit thinner so that it's roughly the thickness that the finished spine of the sword will be. And then I'll forge the bevels on more. I won't quite finish the shape of the tip right now. That'll be done in the beveling process. I just need to set it up for the beveling process. You know, a little bit more narrow than it'll be when it's done, and a little bit straighter, because beveling will widen it and curve it a little bit more. That's a pretty good preform for the tip. Over to the hammer. Now I'm going to start drawing out behind the tip and narrowing that body of the blade some. You want to have fairly good control with the hammer here. Just kind of like a light series of blows. You don't want to mess up and mush that tip down. Drawing the rest of the blade to the planned brief thickness of about 5/16. Probably a heavy 5/16. I think maybe 330 thou or something. You always got to plan to have enough steel to be able to remove to get down to a clean surface without having gone thinner than you wanted to. I mean, if you forge it clean, then you're going to have less waste anyway. But even if you forge it nice and clean and flat, you're still going to have to take off at least 20-30 thou for scale off both sides. Going back to the anvil. I'm just going to use a heavier, this is a 3.5 pound, pretty flat-faced hammer. This is the one that I brought on Forged in Fire both times. Love that hammer. Just to flatten my forging, true it up. Take some of the drawing die marks from the power hammer out. I'm just going to leave this section straight, and then it'll get its bit of curve like a saber later in the beveling process. Now here we are. I've got an 8-pound double jackhammer with flat faces, and I'm beginning to create the step down from the shank of the blade to the cutting edge, that bit that kind of looks like a horse's hock. And after thinking it out, the way that I chose to forge this was similar to making a pair of tongs. You just do half-face blows, isolate a section, and then create an offset section on the other side with half-face blows, like for the pivot area on a pair of tongs. And it's pretty thick when you do that, and then you can accentuate that by drawing it out widthwise with a cross peen. But you'll see that as I do it. This is that little dog leg and the Khopesh blade starting to be formed. I use a heavier hand hammer at this point because I really want what I'm doing with the hammer to penetrate, you know, pretty far into the steel. I don't want to just planish the surface. I need to make big sectional changes. like we did on the tip. Now I'm over here drawing out behind the feature that I just created. I want to create it to full depth, more or less, by hand, because that's more accurate, and then take it over to the hammer and hammer up pretty much to the feature that I've already created by hand. It's still pretty thick and wide at this point. Right now I'm working between two features, the guard area that I've already created on the handle and the dog leg that I've just created in the middle of the blade. I need to just create a straight shank between the two of them, which is about 1/3 of the entire blade length. The cutting edge being the other 2/3. Now what I didn't show in this video, I had problems with my camera battery dying repeatedly, and this was kind of a spontaneous thing, but I didn't think I had enough material collected there at that guard section that we're looking at, so I opted to just kind of spot heat that in the vise with a rosebud torch. I had cranked down on it real hard in the vise, and then I hammered down on the cold end of the handle to get kind of a spot upsetting action at that bulge for the guard, just to widen it, to put a little bit more material in there. And it worked well. I was able to get what I wanted out of it. It took several heats with the rosebud torch and upsetting by hand in the vise. Other than that, I got a pretty good clean profile to start with here. I create that mild arc in the shank and the arc in the handle as part of the profile, and they'll remain that way. I just leave the blade shank straight because it will actually be curved by the beveling action. And when I'm hammering at the cutting edge side of that dog leg too, I don't bring it out wide as much as it later is, because that happens in the beveling operation too. That's really the heel of the cutting edge, so a lot of how you can draw it down wider happens with the cross peen as you're thinning it to be a cutting edge. It's a little bit like an axe there, which makes sense because this weapon is evolved from the Epsilon axe. It just kind of lost the haft part behind the actual cutting edge. But you can see we're already using the cross peen to some extent to widen that heel out. Cross peen is really your friend for drawing material out in the directions that you want it to go specifically. Now we're just getting a final little bit of definition on that dog leg, and we're almost done with our profile. I think that's it. Stay tuned.